By the time Eleanor turned 27, she had learned that silence was not merely a habit, it was a survival skill. She learned it first at the vicarage table, where her aunt sat upright with her hands folded, correcting Eleanor's posture with a glance rather than words. She learned it in church pews, where women bowed their heads lower than the men and thanked God for patience more than joy. She learned it in the careful way her aunt spoke of marriage, not as companionship but as endurance. Something to be borne with grace like illness or grief. Her parents had died when she was 10. After that, the world had narrowed quickly. Her aunt, Margaret, took her in without complaint and raised her with strict propriety and sharper rules. Margaret had been married once. Widowed young. The circumstances were never discussed. Eleanor learned not to ask. "You must understand," Margaret told her often, voice calm and unyielding, "that a woman's comfort is rarely considered. What matters is her conduct." Eleanor absorbed this without resistance. Children adapt. They always do. By the time she reached womanhood, Eleanor had mastered the art of taking up little space. She spoke softly. She walked quietly. She smiled when expected and remained neutral when she was not. Men described her as pleasant. Women described her as good. No one described her as remarkable, which Margaret insisted was a blessing. When the letter arrived proposing marriage, Eleanor was sewing by the window. The paper bore an unfamiliar seal, deep red wax impressed with a crest she recognized only vaguely. Her aunt read it twice, then once more aloud, slower the third time as though savoring the words. A widower. 42 years old. Substantial estates. No living children. The offer was formal, precise, and devoid of sentiment. Margaret folded the letter carefully. "This is an opportunity," she said. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her needle. "He is not young," Margaret continued. "Nor is he known to be gentle. But he is respectable, powerful, and willing." Willing. The word echoed strangely. "I will accept whatever you think best," Eleanor replied, because that was what she had been taught to say. Margaret studied her for a moment, eyes sharp and searching. "You will be his wife," she said. "Not his equal. You must remember that." Eleanor nodded. That night, she lay awake listening to the quiet creak of the house, her mind circling the same thought again and again. Not fear exactly, but preparation. She did not imagine love. She did not imagine happiness. She imagined endurance. The wedding was arranged swiftly. Society approved of efficiency. A woman nearing 30 was not meant to linger in uncertainty. The ceremony took place in a modest stone church, attended by acquaintances rather than friends. Eleanor wore cream silk, elegant but unadorned. Her hair was pinned neatly, no loose curls allowed. Margaret insisted upon it. "A wife must be composed," she said, tightening the pins with unnecessary force. Men dislike disorder. Eleanor did not protest. The groom stood tall at the altar, his presence commanding without overt display. He was broader than she had expected, his dark hair threaded faintly with gray at the temples. His expression was unreadable, neither cold nor warm, simply controlled. When he glanced at her, his gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. It unsettled her. The vows were spoken. Hands clasped. Rings exchanged. Marriage, it seemed, required very little emotion. The journey to his estate passed in silence, broken only by the sound of carriage wheels. Eleanor stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. Her aunt's voice echoed in her thoughts. "Close your eyes if you must. Be still. Endure." They arrived at dusk. The house was vast, stone and shadow and quiet authority. Servants moved efficiently, heads bowed, eyes averted. Eleanor felt suddenly very small. The bedchamber prepared for her was grander than any room she had known. The bed itself was enormous, draped in heavy fabric. Candles flickered softly, casting long shadows. She stood near the window, her back straight, her hands folded tightly. This was the moment she had prepared for all her life. When he entered, she did not turn. Her breathing became shallow. Her muscles locked. She waited. Time stretched. Nothing happened. Finally she heard his voice, calm, measured. "Eleanor." She flinched. "You may sit," he said. Confused, she turned slowly. He stood several steps away, his coat removed, his posture formal. He did not approach. She obeyed, perching stiffly on the edge of a chair. He studied her for a long moment, not with hunger, not with entitlement, but with something unreadable. "How old are you?" he asked. 27, she replied quietly. He nodded once. "You are not afraid to answer questions," he observed. She did not know how to respond to that. You have been taught what marriage requires of you, he continued. Haven't you? Yes. What were you told? Her throat tightened. That, a wife must be patient, quiet, accommodating. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And tonight? He asked. Her hands trembled. She clasped them together harder. That I should not resist, she whispered. That I should endure. Silence filled the room like a held breath. Then he turned away. She stared after him, confusion crashing through her fear. When he faced her again, his expression had changed, something darker behind the control. No, he said firmly. The word struck like a physical blow. She looked up, startled. I will not have obedience born of fear, he continued, nor silence mistaken for consent. She struggled to understand. You are my wife, he said, but that does not make your body my possession. Her heart pounded violently. You look at me as though you expect pain, he said quietly. That ends tonight. She shook her head, tears blurring her vision. I don't know how to be anything else, she admitted. Something in his expression softened. Then we will begin elsewhere, he said. You will sleep in this room. I will sleep in the adjoining chamber. No intimacy will occur without your clear willingness. Her breath stuttered. You do not owe me endurance, he said. You owe yourself honesty. The world tilted. She nodded numbly, unable to process the relief flooding her body. He paused at the door. You may call me sir if that feels easier, he said. Or you may use my title. There is no urgency. Then he left. Eleanor remained where she was for a long time. That night she did not sleep. Her thoughts tangled, fear giving way to confusion, confusion giving way to something dangerously close to hope. Hope was frightening. Hope had consequences. The days that followed were quiet, but not the silence she knew. Meals were shared. He asked her questions and waited for answers. He did not rush her words. He did not dismiss her thoughts. She found herself startled by how often he noticed her discomfort. You need not apologize, he said once, when she murmured an automatic apology for spilling tea. I didn't realize I had, she replied. That you apologize for existing? He said gently. The question lingered. At night she slept alone but not lonely. The absence of dread was its own kind of comfort. Still, old habits die slowly. When he entered a room she stood. When he spoke, she listened without interrupting. When he asked what she wanted, she froze. I don't know, she said once, shame burning her cheeks. That is an answer, he replied. And an honest one. One afternoon, as rain streaked the windows, he invited her to sit beside him in the sitting room. Tell me, he said, what you were taught a good wife should be. She hesitated, then spoke. She spoke of obedience, of silence, of gratitude for restraint, of endurance as virtue. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back, eyes thoughtful. You were trained to disappear, he said quietly. The truth of it pierced her. I will not allow that here, he continued. Not in my house. Not in my marriage. She swallowed hard. I don't know how to change, she admitted. You don't have to, he said. Not all at once. Something inside her shifted. Not healed. Not fixed. But seen. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor wondered, quietly, carefully, what it might mean not to endure but to live. In the weeks following their wedding night, Eleanor discovered that the absence of fear could be more disorienting than its presence. Fear at least had rules. It demanded obedience, silence, endurance. It gave structure to her days and expectations to her nights. Safety, however, required something she had never been taught to practice: choice. Each morning, Eleanor woke expecting tension in her chest, the familiar tightness that had accompanied her since girlhood. And each morning she found instead a strange, unoccupied calm. It felt unfinished, like a room without furniture. Her husband, whom she still addressed formally, never daring to use his given name, maintained the same measured distance he had promised. He did not intrude upon her space. He did not summon her. He did not test her boundaries. And yet he was always present. They took breakfast together in a sunlit room overlooking the gardens. He read correspondence while she poured tea, careful not to spill. When she did not speak, he did not fill the silence unnecessarily. When she did, he listened as though her words carried weight. At first, their conversations were practical. The estate, the servants, travel arrangements for the upcoming season. But gradually he asked questions that unsettled her. What do you enjoy reading? He asked one morning. She blinked, momentarily confused. Whatever is available, she replied cautiously. That wasn't the question, he said gently. She searched her mind and came up nearly empty. No one had ever asked her what she enjoyed. Only what she preferred to avoid. I'm not sure, she admitted. He nodded as though this answer made perfect sense. Then we'll find out. That afternoon he led her into the estate's library, a vast, quiet room lined floor to ceiling with books. The scent of leather and paper hung heavy in the air. Choose something, he said. Her hands hovered uncertainly over the spines. She felt exposed, as though she were being asked to reveal something deeply private without knowing what it was. Anything? She asked. Yes. She selected a slim volume of essays simply because it seemed less demanding. That evening they read by the fire, separately yet together. When she hesitated over unfamiliar words, he waited patiently while she worked through them herself. He did not correct her. He did not rush her. It was a small kindness, but it lodged itself firmly in her chest. As days passed, Eleanor noticed how often she apologized. For speaking too long. For speaking too little. For standing when she should sit. For sitting when she should stand. Once, after she apologized for reaching for the last piece of bread, he set his knife down deliberately. Why did you apologize? He asked. She flushed. I didn't realize I had. That, he said quietly, is the problem. She stared at her plate, shame creeping up her spine. You do not inconvenience me by existing, he continued, and I will not permit you to believe otherwise. The firmness in his voice startled her. I'm sorry, she said reflexively. He sighed, not in irritation but in weary understanding. That, he said, will take time. Their first real disagreement came unexpectedly. One evening, Eleanor lingered in the sitting room long after he had retired. When he returned to retrieve a forgotten book, he found her sitting stiffly on the sofa, hands folded, eyes distant. You should rest, he said gently. I will, she replied at once, rising too quickly. He studied her carefully. You need not rise for me, he said. I should, she insisted. Why? She hesitated. Because, you are my husband. And therefore, he pressed. And therefore, she said slowly, it is respectful. Respect is not submission, he replied calmly. And submission is not required here. Her chest tightened. You say that now, she said before she could stop herself. The words hung between them. He did not react immediately. Say what you mean, he said quietly. She swallowed hard. I mean that kindness can change, she whispered. That patience can be temporary. His expression hardened, not toward her but toward the idea itself. I will not punish you for your honesty, he said. But I will correct false assumptions. She braced herself instinctively. I am not kind out of novelty, he continued, nor restraint out of convenience. I am this way because I have failed before. Her gaze flicked up, surprised. My first marriage, he said, moving to sit across from her, was built on silence much like yours. She listened intently. My wife was obedient, polite, accommodating, he said, and profoundly lonely. Eleanor's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. I believed that providing comfort and protection was enough, he went on. I believed her quiet meant contentment. His jaw tightened. It meant resignation. He exhaled slowly. She died believing she was unimportant. The words settled heavily in the room. I will not allow that mistake again, he said firmly. Especially not with a woman who has already been trained to disappear. Something inside Eleanor fractured, not painfully but irrevocably. That night she cried quietly into her pillow, not from fear but from grief. For a woman she had never met. For herself. For the years she had mistaken endurance for virtue. The next morning Eleanor surprised herself. At breakfast, when he asked whether she preferred tea or coffee, she hesitated, then answered honestly. Tea, she said. But only in the mornings. He smiled faintly. Progress, it seemed, came in fragments. Their physical distance remained unchanged, but the emotional space between them narrowed. One afternoon as they walked through the gardens, the path grew uneven. Without thinking he offered his hand. She froze. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. He noticed at once. It's all right, he said, lowering his hand immediately. I didn't mean to startle you. No, she said quickly. She stared at his hand again. It's fine, she said, placing her fingers lightly in his palm. The contact was brief, innocent, and yet her heart raced as though she had done something dangerous. That evening she avoided him. He noticed. Later he knocked softly on her door. You're withdrawing, he said gently when she let him in. Tell me why. Tears welled unexpectedly. I felt something, she admitted. And then I felt ashamed. Of what? He asked quietly. Of wanting, she whispered. I was taught that desire was something a woman survived, not felt. His expression softened. Desire, he said carefully, is not obligation. And it is not shame. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't know how to separate the two. Then we won't rush it, he replied. Nothing will happen unless you want it, and even then we stop when you say stop. The certainty in his voice grounded her. Weeks passed. Eleanor found herself speaking more. Laughing occasionally, brief, startled sounds that surprised them both. She asked questions now, tentative but sincere. When he invited her to sit beside him during evening reading, she did so without flinching. The first time their shoulders touched, she tensed. He immediately leaned away. It's all right, she said quietly. Please don't move. He stayed. Her breathing slowed. Their first kiss did not come in a moment of passion, but of vulnerability. They were seated by the fire when Eleanor spoke without preamble. May I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why are you so patient with me? He considered this carefully. Because patience is not restraint, he said. It is respect. She nodded slowly. Then very quietly she said, May I try something? His gaze sharpened, not with hunger but with attention. Yes, he said. She leaned forward hesitantly, her movements awkward, uncertain. When her lips brushed his, the contact was light, almost accidental. She pulled back instantly, heart pounding. Is that all right? She asked. He smiled gently. Yes. Relief washed through her. She tried again, this time lingering just a second longer. The kiss was clumsy, uneven, human. When she finally leaned back, her face was flushed, not with shame but with wonder. I didn't disappear, she whispered. No, he said softly. You stayed. That night she slept more deeply than she ever had. Their intimacy unfolded gradually after that, guided not by expectation but by communication. There were pauses, questions, laughter when things felt awkward, tears when old fears surfaced unexpectedly. The first time they shared a bed, Eleanor trembled, not with dread, but with anticipation laced with fear. He noticed immediately. We stop if you need to, he said. I don't want to stop, she replied. I just need to go slowly. So will I. Their intimacy was imperfect, unscripted, real. Eleanor learned that her body was not something to endure, but something to inhabit. And for the first time in her life she did not close her eyes to survive. She opened them, to feel. The first invitation arrived sooner than Eleanor expected. It was delivered on thick ivory paper, the lettering precise and unmistakably aristocratic. A dinner. Formal. An expectation rather than a request. Eleanor held the card in her hands longer than necessary, a familiar tension gathering in her chest. The world, it seemed, had noticed her. Or rather, it had noticed her marriage, and was eager to inspect it. Her husband observed her quietly from across the room. You don't have to attend, he said calmly. I should, she replied at once. The word slipped out before she could stop it. He did not argue. He only tilted his head slightly, studying her. Do you want to? He asked. The distinction unsettled her. I don't know, she admitted. That's honest, he said. Then we'll decide together. They did attend. The dinner was held in a grand London townhouse, every surface polished, every smile sharpened by curiosity. Eleanor felt the eyes upon her the moment she entered the room. Some openly assessed. Others pretended discretion. She had been trained for this. She knew how to stand, how to smile, how to speak just enough and no more. But something inside her resisted shrinking. Throughout the evening, subtle comments floated toward her like smoke. You must find your new position quite an adjustment. How fortunate you are. He has always been a decisive man. Each phrase was polite. Each carried an implication. That she should be grateful. That she should be quiet. That she should not expect permanence. Eleanor answered carefully, her voice steady, her posture composed. But beneath the practiced calm, doubt stirred. Was this kindness she experienced real, or merely temporary? As though sensing the shift in her, her husband placed his hand lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive. Anchoring. She exhaled slowly. The whispers grew louder as the season progressed. At musicales and luncheons, Eleanor overheard speculation she was never meant to hear. She is respectable, of course, but hardly his equal. One imagines the arrangement will change. A man like him does not settle for modest ambition. The words followed her home. At first she tried to dismiss them. But old lessons resurfaced easily. Kindness fades. Endurance lasts. She found herself retreating without realizing it. She spoke less at meals. Deferred again. Apologized more frequently. In their private moments her body stiffened, not in fear but in self-protection. Her husband noticed immediately. One evening, as she gently disengaged from his touch and murmured an excuse about fatigue, he caught her wrist, not tightly, not sharply, but firmly enough to stop her retreat. "Eleanor," he said quietly. "Look at me." She hesitated, then obeyed. "What has changed?" he asked. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched. "I'm all right," she said finally. He did not accept that. "You were," he said gently. "You aren't now." Her composure fractured. The words spilled out, halting at first, then faster. She told him about the whispers, the looks, the quiet assumptions that his patience would wear thin, that her worth was temporary. "I don't want to disappoint you," she whispered. "I don't want to presume." He stood abruptly, anger flashing, not at her but at the injustice of it. "You disappoint me," he said tightly, "only when you disappear." She stared at him, startled. "You were not brought into my life to be endured," he continued. "And I will not allow this world to train you back into silence." Her voice trembled. "They are certain you will grow tired of me." He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt before her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me," he said fiercely. "I did not marry you out of convenience, or obligation, or pity." Her breath hitched. "I married you," he said, "because you are thoughtful, observant, and honest in a world that rewards noise over substance. Because you are strong in ways society refuses to acknowledge." Her eyes burned. "I love you," he said. The words were not dramatic. They were deliberate. She shook her head faintly. "They won't believe that." "Then they will learn," he replied calmly. "But first, so must you." The confrontation with her past came sooner than she expected. A letter arrived from her aunt. Formal. Correct. Heavy with unspoken judgment. Eleanor read it twice before her hands began to shake. "She wishes to visit," Eleanor said quietly. Her husband looked up at once. "Do you want her here?" The question startled her. No one had ever asked her that before. "I think," she said slowly, "that I need to speak to her." They met at the old vicarage. The house felt smaller than Eleanor remembered. The ceilings lower. The walls closer. Her aunt greeted her with polite approval and restrained scrutiny. "You seem well," Margaret said. "Marriage suits you." Eleanor remained standing. "The lessons you taught me," she said calmly, "were wrong." Her aunt stiffened. "A wife must endure," Margaret said sharply. "That is reality." "No," Eleanor replied. "That was your reality." The words trembled, but they held. "I was taught to disappear," Eleanor continued. "To believe silence was virtue and fear was normal. I will not live that way." Margaret's expression hardened. "You are ungrateful," she snapped. "You forget what men are capable of." "I know exactly what they are capable of," Eleanor replied. "And I choose something different." She did not wait for approval. She left. The night of the grand ball arrived like a reckoning. Every prominent family attended. The chandeliers blazed. The music soared. Eleanor stood at the top of the staircase beside her husband, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore deep blue silk, elegant, dignified, unmistakably confident. As they descended together, conversation faltered. Eyes turned. Whispers died mid-sentence. He did not leave her side. He danced with her first, and again later. When he spoke, he listened when she responded. When a woman addressed him while ignoring Eleanor, he redirected the conversation without hesitation. Then, at the height of the evening, he raised his glass. The room quieted. "I would like to offer a toast," he said calmly. "To partnership." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. "To respect," he continued. "To marriage not as endurance, but as choice." He turned to Eleanor. "My wife," he said, his voice steady, "is not fortunate because she married well. I am fortunate because she chose me." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor felt something shift, not only in the room but inside herself. She did not shrink. She did not apologize. She met the gazes directed at her and held them. Later that night, alone in their chambers, Eleanor leaned against him, exhausted and exhilarated. "I spoke," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "You always could," he said. "You were simply never allowed." Months later, winter settled over the estate. Snow blanketed the grounds, quiet and clean. Eleanor stood by the window one morning, his hands resting gently over hers. "I am not afraid any more," she said softly. He smiled. "And if fear returns? Then I will speak," she replied. "Not endure." She placed his hand over her abdomen. A future unfolding. Built not on silence, but on choice.